Army doesn't like more than one disaster in a day.
Looks bad in the newspapers and upset civilians at their breakfast.
I'm Bill Bupert, retired Army officer and irregular warfare practitioner and scholar. Welcome to Chasing Ghosts, an irregular warfare podcast, the show that examines the mythos, lost history, bad thinking, martial malpractice, and government incompetence that informs so much of irregular warfare. Today I want to peek behind the curtain at the vast machinery and briar patch politics of insurgency and counterinsurgency and everything in between. Now, let's go ghost hunting together. Greetings, boppers. This is Bill Bupert, and welcome back to Chasing Ghost. This is episode 82, the CG Mailbag question time on Chasing Ghost and Irregular Warfare podcast. I do have a companion podcast called War Notes, a conflict podcast that covers more stuff that isn't quite irregular warfare or in that spectrum. I have a significant amount of housekeeping to do. First and foremost, I would like to apologize for stepping outside of my fortnightly cadence and being 2 fortnights, that would be 4 weeks, that would be 2 times 2 weeks late in issuance of a podcast. Why have I been radio silent, as it were? Well, as most of you know, who are persistent and perennial listeners, thank you very much, to this podcast, we have moved. We have moved from the southwestern portion of the Gulf in Florida, where I happen to have been born in Miami, Florida, many, many moons ago, up to the Florida Panhandle to join my youngest son and hopefully other sons, maybe even daughters, who will join us here. And one of the reasons we moved up here was this is originally, when we made our move from Arizona to Florida, this is originally where I wanted to go. Finally, through happenstance and synchronicity and coincidence, youngest son fled Houston, Texas, where no young man belongs, Texas, that is, and came down here. He and his bride expecting my, let's see, I hope I have the sequence right. I have 7 grandchildren, 2 on the way this year. Destiny, his bride, will be having her child after Savannah does up in the northern reaches of the United States near the Canadian border with my middle son. And so 2 grandchildren on the way this year. We have a lot of moving parts and pieces in the Bupert clan this year. Those of you who don't know, I have 5 children. I will have, by the end of this year, 9 grandchildren. I am here with my lovely bride. I think that I'm closing on final retirement from my day job, and I cannot wait. I am counting the months, weeks, days, and hours to finally make the denouement on my job and career days at which I have been plying since the age of 16. So that's good news for me. We are finally moved into our bunker complex. Things aren't complete. As a matter of fact, ordered a safe. This is housekeeping after all, and I haven't spoken with you for a while. Ordered a safe. That safe happened to be nearly a ton in weight, delivered on a semi. The semi driver, nicest guy you could meet, comes in and he warns me. He says, "Hey, step back when I roll this onto the lift gate." Well, it just so happens that when one has a lift gate that is not level, it may have a 3, 4, 5 degree list to port or starboard, and you put something that weighs nearly a ton on said gate, that thing can become a rapidly kinetic object. And yes, that's exactly what happened. It slipped off of his pallet jack, slipped over the lift gate, and collided with the asphalt in front of my driveway, of course, so heavy it even dented the asphalt. And so I refused delivery, and now I'm hoping that this week the replacement will arrive for that. And once I have that in and installed properly, and it's in my part of the bunker complex where I keep those kind of things, all will be well with the world. It just so happens I'm not in the podcast studio broadcasting this today, but I will probably for the next episode or the one after that have a dedicated podcast place here in my home, thanks to the largesse of my beautiful bride in working out the floor plan and saying, sure, you can have an office and a podcast studio. So super excited about that. What else has been going on? I'm 2 weeks late, and I am going to spend a little bit more time on housekeeping. I did get letters. I'm going to call them letters. They're all emails, but I'll call them letters just for old time's sake. And that's what we'll be discussing today in this episode. And then once I have all my books unpacked, my God, I am lonely not having all of my books on the shelves. Well, it just so happens I completed over the weekend building 17 shelves for my office and my podcast studio. I sorted through my book boxes, and hopefully we will be unlimbering all of those books this coming weekend or the following one, and then putting them in their proper place so that I can deliver you the quality episodes that I have done in the past. I find myself a bit forlorn and lost right now without my books to guide me in whatever it is that we're going to converse about when it comes to irregular warfare or even conventional conflict. Moving is a lot of work, and I'm hoping that this is the last move that we make, and I'm hoping to assume room temperature in this bunker complex. A new acquisition that I got as a result of this move was I finally got what I've been lusting after book-wise for the longest time. And no, it's not Lysander Spooner's Complete Works in 6 volumes. I've already got that. It is one of the prouder additions to my library. I am now the proud owner via a bookseller in Great Britain who gave me a terrific deal and packed it in such a fashion that it was probably the best packing job for books I've ever gotten. The Heinlein Society apparently commissioned a 46-volume complete, let's call it complete, it may not be complete, of Robert Heinlein's books in leather. I have been searching for a copy of this for the longest time, managed to get a really good deal on the complete set. And in my podcast studio, above my 2 smaller safes and below my slat wall display of my 1903, 1917 Enfield and Garand, along with my helmets, will be said Heinlein book collection, proudly adorning those safes. If I happen to do interviews or such that demand that I'm on video, I'm hoping that that is a much more scintillating backdrop than not. And by the way, if you happen to want to correspond, you can get in touch with me at cgpodcast@pm.me. That is cgpodcast@pm.me. I'll post that in the show notes. And if you get a chance to go to my Substack, where one can post comments about the show that you happen to be listening to right now, I would love to see those comments. If you get a chance to leave a review or even give me 4 or 5 stars on your podcast vendor of choice, you are doing me a huge favor, and I am forever in your debt if you do so. And one more item before we get on with the shoe, as Ed Sullivan would say. I have had to, in the construction of my bookshelves and moving stuff, in some things that we've done to improve the house, I listen to podcasts while I'm doing that. And no, I don't listen to my own, although I'm happy you listen to my bloviations. I've been listening to The Unauthorized History of the Pacific War with Seth Paradon, Bill Tody, and John Parshall. It just so happens that Seth has been an historian for a while. I think he was a chief historian for the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and I hope to go there someday. As a matter of fact, that's probably 4 hours away from my present location, and I will be visiting later this month with a good friend of mine, a veteran friend of mine. We even served together in Afghanistan, who happens to live in L.A., not that L.A., Louisiana, but he doesn't live anywhere near New Orleans. I think that my safety would probably be in the hazard if I were to go to New Orleans, but I do want to see that museum, so I'll make whatever preparations I need to keep the bride and I safe if we happen to go there. Bill Tody is a former submarine commander, gives great insight, and John Parshall is a frequent guest. I think he's almost a regular now, who wrote Shattered Sword, which was the midway book, if you really wanted to appreciate from both a Japanese and an English perspective what happened on those fateful days in 1942, that one could probably call the critical path to Japanese defeat, 3 years away, but defeat nonetheless, that would be guaranteed by the destruction of Kido Butai. As those of you know, I am an amateur military historian, have many books, read many books. The Pacific War I find especially scintillating and interesting, and I'm always fond of quoting James Hornfisher, who left us early, unfortunately, due to cancer, probably one of the best naval historians of our generation, in which he wrote a book called Flood Tide, which was part of his Pacific War history. And in there, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the U.S. Navy had managed to, from the coast of California and the rest of the West Coast in America, all the way to Japan, erected in a matter of 4 years, plus or minus a few months, literally a maritime civilization. Amazing. So many great stories in the Pacific War, so many lessons learned for big combat. And probably everybody knows that I have a bone in my teeth when it comes to the use of aircraft carriers. I think that they are the crossbow and chariot of the 21st century, but the Japanese defeat could not have been done in detail and with the alacrity that it was without the aircraft carrier. And the aircraft carrier at the time, like the crossbow and chariot, by the way, probably became the premier maritime weapon on the high seas at the time. And after 1945, it would continue its slide, its glide path to, in my mind, an anachronism. But nonetheless, the stories that one hears here on this, it's an incredibly long podcast series. I think they have 229 videos now. I've made my way through several dozen. I'm up, well, maybe near 50. I am up near 1944, and we just got finished listening to Leyte Golf. So again, Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast in many ways, and they have a video portion of their podcast, far superior to mine. But nonetheless, I'm here in my little tiny arcane and esoteric corner of military history, and I'm glad that you guys tag along. So, on to the mailbag. LH writes me, and I'm going to try to make these short and then go into my explanatory response. LH wrote, well, what happens to the U.S. Air Force? And the reason why LH wrote that was because, again, bone in my teeth, U.S. Navy going in the wrong direction, because I just so happen to think that when it comes to surface warfare combatants, that manned combatants and manned aircraft are probably not going to be around for very long. And those countries that invest in these technologies instead of unmanned are going to regret putting that money into that, because it's much like December 8th, 1941, where all of the battleship admirals, to include the Japanese, the British, and the U.S., and in a more minor fashion, the Dutch and the French, discover that all of their decades, if not generations of investment in dreadnoughts and battleships and naval gunnery are for naught. And I think it's the day after December 7th, the Pearl Harbor attack, the Prince of Wales and the Repulse are both sunk exclusively near Singapore by Japanese naval aviation. I would say that between 1941 and 1942, Japanese aviators were probably the finest naval aviators on Earth, but they would soon succumb to the sleeping giant, as it were. By the way, Yamamoto never said that. That is an allegory. But nonetheless, the next 3 years would prove that the finest naval aviators on this Earth would be the U.S. Navy. So LH is asking after, what do I think of the U.S. Air Force? If you've been paying attention, you see that unmanned aviation, as I mentioned before in previous podcasts, it's 2020, and you and I are having a coffee at a place that isn't Starbucks, and we're chatting about military history and military affairs and things. And then you say, you know, Bill, in 5 years, unmanned aircraft, UASs, FPVs, are going to be responsible for 80% of all battlefield casualties in the next 5 years. And I would look at you and I'd say, is there some LSD in your coffee or what? And it turns out that I would be wrong, because that's exactly what's happened. So from mud to space, in that place where all the air is provisioned for us to breathe, we have flying objects, we have bombers, we have fighters, we have surveillance aircraft, we have reconnaissance aircraft, we have cargo aircraft. We have all of these, and all of these happen to be manned now. And I do think that the days of the manned fighter aircraft, despite the extraordinary expense that the Air Force is going to replace the very bad F-35, Alpha, Bravo, or Charlie, the Bravo and Charlie being the Marine and carrier aircraft respectively. The Marine VTOL is a little more vertical than the Charlie model, which is the one that is used on Navy carriers. We have discovered that the $1 trillion plus, or are we near $2 trillion now in the total F-35 program, has been largely money wasted. So what would I do? I've gone into excruciating detail that you can bore yourself with by listening to my podcasts on how to fix the Navy and such. And I did do an episode on the Air Force and what I would suggest. Number one, I would suggest that we get rid of all manned bombers, B-52s, B-2s, all of the successive, very extraordinarily expensive aircraft that are going to follow on, that are being pursued as we speak. I would get rid of all silo-borne missiles, because I just don't think that they have the exclusivity or the ability to defend themselves that we think that they did, not only because of nuclear counterstrikes or even conventionally tipped counterstrikes on hypersonic weapons and such, but UAVs and all of those kind of things can very effectively, as a very cost-cutting measure, render those moot. I think what the Air Force has to do, and they won't listen to me, is they need to concentrate much more for the remainder of this century. At least we can concentrate up until 2050, in putting a lion's share of all of their technological investment, advancement, engineering research into establishing unmanned modalities at two levels. Number one, the very exquisite level, where very expensive, very large aircraft, and then on the other side of the spectrum, affordable mass. That's the phraseology that's so popular among the Department of War phrase makers. That affordable mass, by the way, has to be aircraft, UAVs, maybe at $5,000 to $10,000, as the Iranians, the Russians, and the Ukrainians have proven that they can very well do, and millions upon millions of them available as an attriting force, as a prosecution force, and unfortunately, thanks to my Army affiliation, the number one and premier killer of all soldiers on the battlefield, from the single soldier up to the regimental level and beyond. In order to do this, there has to be X competitions, I think, that the Air Force would do, where they come out and they say, listen up, if you guys can find a way, any of you out there, whether you're Palantir or maybe a startup company, and you can deliver to us a $5,000 long loiter UAV that is maneuverable in terminus and is also webbed and netted so that third-party intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance birds can talk to it and direct it. We'll give you a big $10 million prize if you manage to come up with something that actually works. That kind of competition, ironically enough, if you read Childers' book on the gun, where he talks about the development of the Kalashnikov and the Armalite rifle, what occurred in Russia, believe it or not, is that they had all of the armories there at the close of the war to save Joseph Stalin go into a competition to deliver to the Red Army what would soon become the AK-47, accepted and designed by Kalashnikov in 1947, unlike in the 1950s, where there were fixed trials in the U.S., where you had the wonderful FN-FAL, metric or inch, in this case, most likely metric. That would be the Fusil Automatique Légère light automatic rifle, designed by a genius by the name of Dudon Saïv at FN Herstal and others since 1953. At the time of the trials for the U.S., in which they were trying to find a replacement for the M1 Garand, which I love, by the way, even though Garand was a Canadian. It was known as a T-48, entered the trials, but no, what happens? They fixed the trials. I am convinced they fixed the trials. On Forgotten Weapons, there are several videos where they talk about this very thing, and they adopt the M14 instead of the T-48/FN-FAL. As a result of that, we have the shortest duration rifle that is issued to the United States Armed Forces, 7 years, until the inimicable and ingenious Stoner rifle, the AR series, the Armalite rifles, are adopted to replace the really awful M14. Now, mind you, I am not going to spew hatred towards the M14 during this episode. I competed in the Pacific Regionals with an M14 when I was on the rifle team at the time in the U.S. Navy. Loved the rifle, but it was not a rifle I'd want to take to war, but I'd always wanted to take it to the range because it also happened to have one of the best iron sights ever made by man, which happened to be a copy of the one that you see on the Garand. So again, they adopt the M14, which is just a trash rifle. In my opinion, in the M1A, I'm not a fan. I'm probably going to lose some of my weapons aficionado listeners for uttering such words, but I really don't like the rifle at all. It is not handy, it is very finicky, and it is very difficult to maintain if you don't have depot-level maintenance available to you beyond the Dash 10 that you would have to do to keep this thing alive and in the fight. But the point that I'm making is that, ironically enough, at the height of the Soviet Union, we have the Russians competing to find the very best rifle that they can issue to their Red Army. And at the very time, in capitalist America, we have fixed trials against a rifle that just so happened to be made in Belgium, and the rest is history. So in short, if the United States Air Force does not seek to replace all of its manned modalities, I'll give them the transport aircraft if they wish, all of its manned modalities, especially combat aircraft with UCAVs, unmanned combat aerial vehicles, this country, in whatever war of choice it engages in, you'll note that since 1945, they've all been wars of choice, and they have all ended very poorly. The country will be in even worse trouble for the remainder of this century. I have another letter from MS, and I'm going to slide it down if I may. Is fraud a form of irregular warfare? What an interesting concept. When one looks at fourth and fifth generation warfare, which is beyond the maneuver warfare of third gen, and happens to be a great umbrella rubric for irregular warfare, can fraud be used? Well, fraud can be used because I would characterize fraud as a monetary form of a color revolution. Whether it was what the Germans did on the eve of World War II, where they were trying to flood England with fake counterfeit pound notes and such, or the color revolutions that have been conducted with voter fraud around the world by certain agencies in the United States government, that they don't end well either. It is my conclusion that, yea and verily, it is in the arsenal, that fraud is a form of irregular warfare. And if one were to come to me and say, would you characterize the massive fraud that we're seeing in this country, the United States, whether a result of the party affiliation or states in which it's happening, or ethnic enclaves that happen to be very good at this kind of thing? I'm looking at you, Albania and Somalia. Yes, it is a form of irregular warfare. And what the United States has to do is treat it as such. As a matter of fact, when it comes to Minnesota and such, when it comes to the Somalian fraud, not only have we heard stories of the money being sent to terrorists or insurgency organizations in Somalia, Sudan, and such, sort of laundered from the United States Treasury through the Somalians. And then I have heard cases of briefcases going on aircraft loaded with cash heading to Eritrea, Ethiopia, the Sudan, Somalia to fund whatever it is they're going to fund. Now, the fun part about all of this is that the U.S. Treasury, besides the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is FinCEN, has a variety of organizations that are triggered by $1 going to one terrorist organization that allows them to have a discovery process that is far deeper, wider, and goes back much farther than if this were simply a conventional indigenous crime spree. Now, has the U.S. government taken that on and used the forensic tools at their disposal to do that very thing? I don't know. As I've told you again and again, and for those who may have seen a movie called The Battle of Algiers, if you have a whiteboard and you have intelligence officers and you have people with an IQ above 110 or 120, and they all get together and they've got access to phone records, to letters, to cell phone records, to triangulation of conversations between those, one can put together association matrices. As a matter of fact, I would suggest that when September 11th happened, if the world were a better and more intelligent place at the time, what the administration under Bush should have done was taken a knee for 6 months, brought in a variety of folks who would lay out a forensic association matrices of all of these folks who were involved, whether they were auxiliaries, safe house providers, bankers, whatever the case may be, that led to 9/11, and then go out once one has identified all of them, and depending on the wharf and wolf of the administration, you can go out and either nab them or disappear them. That is beyond my ken as far as what they could do, but I think it would have been a far better way to address what happened on 9/11 with the Taliban vacationing in both Pakistan and Afghanistan. The reason America didn't invade Pakistan, which happened probably along with Saudi Arabia, to be the grossest malefactors that helped that assault on the United States, is because it just so happens that the Pakistanis have nuclear weapons and that the Saudis hold the keys to the oil bourse. Hence, Afghanistan was targeted. It's why I tell close friends that we missed a bullet because Al-Qaeda did not base themselves out of Mexico City. You can imagine what kind of disaster that would be if we had invaded Mexico in response to 9/11. Final question, and yes, this will be a short episode, but I promise you, my loyal listeners that once I have everything together, once the books are unboxed and back at home on their shelves, and I have for me, a vast panoply of material available to include probably one of the most complete collections of the Journal of Military History out of VMI, outside of VMI, in my very possession. That last question is, there has been folks floating that $1.5 trillion would be afforded the Department of War, that would be their next budget. And what do you think that would do to improve things, or maybe not improve things? I happen to think, and I've covered this elsewhere because of our Sovietized and sclerotic acquisition system that we have to deliver to the troops some of the worst weapons made by mankind in the last 200 years in so many ways, that to give these people at the Pentagon that much money without assessing how to fix this broken acquisition system is a disaster. And I don't think that the United States, and again, I'm stepping a little bit out from under the irregular warfare rubric here, I don't think that not only are they not responsible enough, but I don't think they've fired up a Marshall reimagining of what the 21st century conflict space looks like. I have mentioned in the past that I never use the term near peer or third world or fourth world or developing world when we have a foe, because I think that everybody now is a near peer. Now, this is thanks to AI. This is thanks to the missile age. This is thanks to UAS. This is thanks to so many things and what's available to every fighter on planet Earth if they choose to. You can have the most bodacious billion-dollar weapon systems and exquisite platforms and all of these things. But you know what? Pilots have to eat. Pilots have to sleep. Soldiers have to do the same thing. And what's going to happen, thank you, General Van Riper, for your inspiration for Millennium Challenge in 2002, the next war, the next big war, is not going to isolate itself to folks lining up in places of battle and only fighting among themselves and not the populations and such. The asymmetric advantage that's afforded by UAVs, FPVs, AI assessments, small arms advances, all of these things are making it so that you may have a formidable shield wall, but within that shield wall, let's picture ourselves here in CONUS in the continental United States, there's a lot of soft bellies there to be taken advantage of. There are a lot of things to be leveraged in a fashion, in a way of war that America as a country has never experienced, like what has been visited upon by the U.S. and other Western armies in the Middle East and Southeast Asia and stuff. That's coming home to roost. So if I had my druthers, not only would $1.5 trillion not be thrown at the Pentagon, but I would ask them, what have you done with the $1 trillion year after year? And what have you created with this exquisite platform force that puts its tail between the legs in the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea over the past 18 months when it comes to kerfuffles with Yemen and Iran and everything in between? It's not a good look for the United States. So I would leave you with this. There must be a severe and very aggressive reassessment of everything the American military does. Do I expect that to happen? I do not, because the bureaucratic inertia of this, as I mentioned, Sovietized and sclerotic system that we labor under doesn't really change until it gets an existential punch in the mouth. So, mind you, yes, it's a shorter episode. I am promising you that as soon as I get my affairs totally in order here, books are unboxed, library is seeing the light of day again, things are going to get much more interesting around here. So thanks for listening to this brief episode. I wanted to surface, breathe air, and let you know that, yea and verily, I am still alive and haven't assumed room temperature yet. If you liked what you've listened to, mention it to friends, family, and colleagues. If you happen to listen to this on a podcast vendor of your choice, please leave a 4 or 5-star review. If you leave a narrative review, I am forever in your debt. And thanks for listening. This is Bill, out.